Good morning and a very warm welcome. I'm Sue Nelson and I'll be your host guiding you through this event. It's great to have so many of you back and to see new faces joining us for the first time. Public sector digital transformation is being delivered to you by the Public Sector Executive, and the day will be packed full of opportunities to network and acquire current sector knowledge, whether this knowledge is gained from our speakers or event partners in the digital marketplace. We'd like to thank the industry leaders and experts who are with us today for sharing their invaluable insights. The content standard on our PSE 365 platform means that all the content is CPD certified. For every hour of content you watch live, you'll earn one CPD point. To get your certificate, please email the PSE team at events@cognitivepublishing.com. That's events@cognitivepublishing.com, and they'll sort it out. Alongside the keynotes and panel discussions on the agenda for you to enjoy today, we have some fantastic networking opportunities through our speed networking function. When you collaborate with colleagues, there's another great source of education. It also helps to extend the knowledge and connections shared today, which can be accessed at any time, ultimately growing our PSE 365 community. And on that note, a reminder about our PSE platform. You and your teams can access a wealth of resources as part of our on-demand content alongside the digital marketplace. We value your views, so feel free to share your thoughts and experiences across LinkedIn and Twitter using the hashtag PSE-365. That's PSE-365. So let's move to the focus of today. Last year saw the publication of the roadmap Transforming for a Digital Future 2022 to 2025, Digital and Data. Despite that, a recent survey by the UK Government Research Forum highlighted legacy technology, budget constraints, and a lack of training as the top barriers to transforming government services. Nearly two-thirds, 63%, of the 1,006 civil servants who responded raised legacy technology as an issue, closely followed by 61% citing budget constraints and lack of funding. Half of those working on transformation programs also said that a lack of skills is a problem in that they're unable to hire qualified talent. A third of the respondents stated that they had very few or no skills or knowledge in how artificial intelligence, machine learning, and automation can be deployed to improve public service delivery and implementing, deploying, migrating, and/or maintaining applications or cloud infrastructure. The report also found that civil servants are keen to develop their digital skills, with over 78% stating that they'd like to receive more digital skills training. However, nearly 1 in 5 report that they've not received internal or external training within the last 2 years. In some quarters, budget constraints are allied with a lack of understanding by senior officials to embrace the changes needed. There's the desire to improve digitally, but without the understanding of what that entails, there is a reluctance. So, how can senior officials with budget pressures be convinced to invest? The old saying, if it isn't broken, don't fix it, is no longer relevant when it comes to legacy systems. The costs to maintain legacy systems are no longer meeting value for money. Public sector bodies have no option but to transform their legacy systems to digital. The burning question, of course, is how. How can the mindsets of those controlling the finances be changed to release budgets to invest in transforming legacy systems? And what are the solutions needed by those managing the projects to make that happen? This event aims to bring ideas and thoughts from peers and colleagues that are dealing with the challenge of digital transformation, regardless of where they are on the digital journey. And so, with that, it's time to hear from our first keynote speaker of the day. We're joined by Jonathan Pownall. Jonathan is a digital specialist at the National Audit Office and has over 20 years' experience of assessing digital and technology programs in the central government sector, including the management of associated technology risk. He's a contributing author to numerous NAO reports, including Digital Transformation in Government, Challenges in Using Data Across Government, Digital Transformation in the NHS, and the Challenges in Implementing Digital Change. Today, Jonathan will be talking with us about digital transformation in government, perspectives from the NAO. This will cover the findings from our report on the challenges in implementing digital change, how CDDO have set out to address them in their digital roadmap 2022 to 25, and where we see the persistent issues that will require sustained effort. So please welcome Jonathan to the digital stage.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue, for the intro. So, as Sue said, I'm with the NAO. I'm part of the Digital Insights team, and we look at digital transformation across government. So that's both providing specialist input into reports on individual departments or programmes. So, for example, I've been involved in our report on the Home Office for the National Law Enforcement Data Programme. So that's replacing the Police National Computer, the Digital Strategy for Defence, and modernising DEFRA legacy. And then also we take a cross-government look at how digital transformation is progressing. And Sue mentioned a number of reports that I've also co-authored. Most recently, the challenges in implementing digital change, but also our most recent one, which was digital transformation in government, addressing the barriers to efficiency. That came out a couple of months ago in March. And it's those two reports I'm going to cover in the introductory session. But before I start, and could I have the next slide, please, Jack? Thanks. Just a little bit about the NAO for those who may not be so familiar with us. So we're the UK's public spending watchdog. We report to Parliament on how government's used its resources. Worth just repeating that we're not civil servants and we don't report to any ministers. The head of the NAO is actually an officer of the House of Commons, but we do share the aim with everyone on this call that we do want to help improve public services. As well as reports, we do produce guides highlighting our insights on particular topics, and three of the most recent ones that are on our website that you might like to have a look at are on cloud services, improving government data, and the use of agile in large-scale change programs. Next slide, thanks. So on to the first of the reports on the challenges in implementing digital change. And if you look back over successive government digital transformation strategies over the last 25 years or so, so going right back to 1996, you can see a remarkably consistent vision of what these strategies have said. They've all addressed the desire for more modern technology, addressing legacy systems, joining up data, better interoperability of systems, more efficient public services, and easier for citizens and businesses, so people like you and me to use. But as we put in the timeline, there's been a very mixed picture of successful implementation. I should caveat that by saying that by transformation, we're really talking about the big ticket transformation of major public services. We're not talking about things like ERP system implementations. They're a bit more bread and butter. Next slide, please. Jack, thanks. So what we wanted to hard to deliver on these strategies. So can we get behind the barriers? So we know that digital transformation is not easy, and especially not where there's quite a complicated and messy legacy environment, and whatever people are developing has to fit in and around what's already there. And we also wanted to get away from the notion that it's all about failures in the execution of projects and programs. So it's not just those aspects. And it led us to think, are these major programs in government starting off on a realistic footing right from the outset? So in this report, we came up with 6 barriers and we grouped them into 2 broad areas. So firstly, on initiating for success. So this is all about the initial thinking. So whether the scope of these major programs is in reality realistic, or perhaps we're taking on too much. And then secondly, looking at setting up for effective delivery. So whether the conditions are right for programs to succeed right from the start. So on understanding aims, ambition and risk, what we see here, and this leads into the skills session coming up, is what we see as leaders at senior levels who perhaps don't have that background or understanding of digital and technology, but they're the ones making decisions about the scope and shape and the outcome of major digital programs without possibly fully comprehending the complexities and the scale of what's involved. And it's not just us saying this. Those of you who've heard me speak before on this might recall that we also point to a report that the Cabinet Office commissioned from the Digital Economy Council called Organising for Digital Delivery. And they also comment on, and I'm quoting directly now from that report, what they call a general lack of technical fluency across the senior civil service. So this leads into another important area on skills and capability, and no doubt this will come up in the next panel, but as we see it, there's two aspects to this. It's first of all the non-specialist senior leaders I've just talked about, but then also the more specialist areas. And it's a really hot market for digital skills at the moment, as I'm sure you all know, and getting those skills into government and then hanging on to them. The choice of delivery method question, I mentioned a moment ago that we produced a guide on Agile and the challenges of using it at scale. So without getting into a debate about the intrinsic merits of Agile, what we've seen in organisations is sometimes they come unstuck when they've skipped some of that upfront thinking in the belief that everything can be iterated later. So in our guide, we set out some high-level questions to ask when Agile is being used at this scale. And there's also a blog on the NAO website with examples of the sorts of things that we think do benefit from early consideration, such as architecture and data models. So the other areas in this report, I'll pick up on when we're talking about our latest report. But now is a good time just to bring in the CDDO roadmap. So next slide, please. So as we know, and as Sue mentioned in the introduction, the roadmap was published last summer. As you can see from the screenshot here, it's good to see the NAO credited in influencing its development. And we do give CDDO credit for their fresh approach with the roadmap. It was developed very collaboratively in conjunction with departments. There's permanent secretary level sponsorship for each of the 6 missions. And while the targets in the roadmap are ambitious, they don't read like a worthy but undeliverable wish list, which some of the early strategies, if we're being honest, perhaps did read that way. So it's a good start. But as we know, transformation is hard. And so the question is, can momentum be maintained? And it's not all down to CDDO, we have to say. Transformation has to happen in those departments and organisations that are delivering those services. Next slide, please. So the digital transformation addressing the barriers to efficiency report. So this came out on March the 10th this year, and it's in 3 parts. Firstly, we look at the background and development of the CDO roadmap, so how government's new approach is addressing those factors which have caused previous transformation attempts to falter. And to be clear, we do see the new approach as a positive. Secondly, we look at implementing the roadmap, so how CDDO is working to maximise the chances of success, and how progress is being measured and monitored, and what's being done to maintain momentum. And then in the final part, we summarise progress on the 6 missions of the roadmap and some of the potential difficulties ahead. But rather than giving a running commentary on each of those missions, I thought for the last part of this introduction, I'd summarise our key findings and messages coming out of that report. Next slide, please. So on key findings, it won't surprise you to learn that leadership and skills is one of the major ones. And as I said earlier, this is both at the senior level and at the more specialist level. So at senior level, what we'd said in our earlier report is there's some excellent digital leaders in government, but not many of them sit at the top table in their own departments. And you may recognise this, but it's quite common for digital leaders to report in via, say, a chief operating officer, or maybe a director general of finance and strategy, that sort of thing. So in this report, we make an explicit recommendation to departments that membership of their most senior decision-making body should include at least one senior digital leader. And we also suggest that departments should appoint at least one non-executive with digital data and technology expertise. And at the more specialist level, there is still, I think, a skills gap out there. So CDDO and the Cabinet Office are doing some good things to try and address it. But in February, I spoke at another PSE event, and at that event, I did point out that NAO said similar things about addressing the skills gap. We said it back in 2011, then in 2013, and again in 2015. So attempting to address this gap is not a new problem. So I think government does need to keep under constant review what can realistically be achieved if these skills gaps aren't being closed at the pace that we would like. And incidentally, that's also a message that came out of the report that we did on the digital strategy for defence, which came out in October. I'll take the middle two together, so on efficiency and legacy services. And again, as Sue mentioned, these are a barrier. And this is another area which we see as a major constraint on digital transformation. So that's both legacy systems and the data that's in those systems. Now, as we saw from the timeline of strategies, organisations have been trying to address legacy and retire it, phase it out, modernise it for years. But it's not that simple, as we know. And governments had huge ambitions to join up its data, but it's hard enough within some large organisations, let alone across organisational boundaries. But also, we're not convinced that government's got a good handle on the costs of its legacy. So by that, we don't just mean the direct costs of running the technology and supporting it, but we're also looking at all the hidden costs of the processes and the procedures that go around that. And for example, dealing with failure demand, that kind of thing. Now, two of the six missions, in the roadmap are addressing this. So mission 1 on the top 75 services and mission 4 on efficient and sustainable technology. So recognise these issues, that's a positive, but of course they will take time to address, and in our view it's important to keep chipping away at this. And this includes data quality as well, and we've got a panel on data coming up, so I'm sure we'll cover that some more then. And then lastly, reform at the centre of government. So this is mission 6, where CDDO is looking to ensure that central policies and processes around things like business cases, approvals, funding, procurement, policy development work in a way that helps digital and is suited to the way digital programmes work. So this mission does depend very much on other areas of government, and it's still very early days to see progress on this at the moment. Next slide, please. So that's a quick overview of how we see the current state of play at the moment. Now, as you may know, most NAO reports are taken by the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament, and as it happens, the session coming up for this report is next Monday afternoon. So this will be live streamed on the Parliament website, or it'll be available on Catch Up if you'd like to watch it then or later. And it's going to be well worth looking at just for a latest view on how CDO see things progressing. So I think I'm used my allotted time, so I'm not sure there's room for any questions or observations just now, but contact details are there on screen, and I'll be participating in the data panel later on this morning. So there's another opportunity for comments and observations. So with that, I will say thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand back to Sue. Thanks.
Insightful keynote and a great way to kick off this virtual conference. So to our first leaders debate, digital skills. Against the backdrop of the cost of living crisis, high inflation and a competitive job market, public sector leaders are finding it increasingly hard to attract, train and retain the people they need to close the digital skills gap. Despite the need to be digitally fit for the future, the situation doesn't look favourable in the current climate. So, what can public sector leaders do to alter the climate to benefit their organisations and ensure they're digitally fit? The Transforming for a Digital Future 2022 to 25 roadmap for digital and data set out the government's ambition to transform digital public services in the years ahead, outlining a specific mission to build digital skills at scale within departments and agencies, which gives hope. But as staff continue to say they lack the skills, it also raises questions as to when they will get the opportunity to acquire those skills. And here to discuss these issues, we have Sonia Pawson, who's Director of Government Skills and Curriculum Unit at the Cabinet Office, and Thomas Beautyman, the Deputy Director, Government Digital Capability, also at the Cabinet Office. Sonia, let's start with you, as we've also, heard Jonathan bring up the skills issue in his keynote. So let's go straight in with that in terms of how you're going to raise the ceiling of critical skills like data and digital. All right. I can see we haven't quite got, sorry, Sonia there at the moment. Thomas, let's start with you then. We know that there's the will and the intention within government for people to acquire more digital skills, but also some issues to overcome there. So how challenging a transformation is this going to be?
Good morning, everybody. So it is challenging. This is about systemic change across government. Oh, apologies, I've got some feedback. Can you hear that? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't know whether everybody else can.
So this is about scale change to the way we do business, the way we organize our workforce, the skills that we've got in our workforce. I think there is a realization that actually the skills that an organization like ours needs to deliver in the future, needs to deliver excellent services for citizens, is changing. The mix is changing. And over the course of the last year, I think we've seen reason actually to be genuinely optimistic about the changes that we're making. And I say that for two reasons. Firstly, there are significant changes outside of our organization. So you only have to look at the news this week. So I think on Tuesday, ONS published a report to explain a bit about how the labour market is changing outside. I think for the first time in something like about the last 12 years, we've seen a marginal increase in unemployment. That's suggesting that inflation is making its impact on the labour market. We've also seen, though, organisations like Meta, like Google, announce quite significant layoffs. I think again earlier this week, Vodafone announced that they are planning for 11,000 layoffs. And I think just this morning, BT explained their ambition that over the course, by the end of the decade, they're looking actually to reduce the size of their workforce by something like about 55,000. So this is really material for us. If we'd have been having this conversation a year ago, we'd have been talking about how overnight Google had announced they were wanting to bring in 1,000 new site reliability engineers, and we'd seen the market rate increase by something like about 20 points for those site reliability engineers. That's not the case now, but it does remain competitive. It just happens that it's more stable and there's more opportunity for an organisation like us to genuinely compete. The second reason, though, I think we were optimistic is because the strategy that was really lovely teed up by Jonathan, I think is taking effect. So we think about our organisation, our skills, maybe in respect of two segments. So the first, I suppose, critical segment is all of those digital makers. So user researchers, business analysts, software devs, DevOps, and so on. That bit of the organization is genuinely increasing. So beyond the commitments that Jonathan talked about in our strategy, we've also agreed that we will increase the proportion in the overall civil service workforce of everybody that recognizes themselves as digital makers. In the last 6 months, not quite the last 6 months, but in April 2020 to October 2020, April 2022 to October 2022. So in that 6-month period, we brought in about 2,000 net new hires into DDAT in government. That's an increase of 12% in our workforce. So we are genuinely attracting more talent into the organisation. And then the other reason I'm optimistic is about, we think about the other segment. So the other segment is all of the other civil servants that we need to have a level of skill and confidence, all of those users. And we can speak a bit in this session and explain actually how we're doing things like the Digital Excellence Programme to upskill our broader colleagues who might not necessarily identify themselves as digital makers, but increasingly we need them to feel confident, to feel comfortable with engaging with digital data.
Thank you, Thomas. Sonia, nice to have you with us. You just missed the slight start of that. We've just had a keynote speech with Jonathan, and obviously we're talking about skills, and this is your area. And I just, we've just had quite some good start there from Thomas in terms of what's happening in the increase in hiring the skilled professionals that you need. So how are you raising the ceiling of critical skills like data and digital?
Yeah, thanks. And can you hear me okay? Let me just do a sound check.
Yeah, everyone's hearing you fine. And Thomas as well.
That's great. And Thomas and I work closely together. So that's one good thing. We're doing a lot actually within the government campus and curriculum for government. And in terms of raising the ceiling, we have a mantra actually of raise the floor, raise the ceiling. And we think a lot about what our future skills are, what's required and what that means for our people. And we've recognised actually over the last few years as we've developed our curricula that some of the things that used to be considered specialist or technical are no longer, and we need to build that universal capability, especially in areas like data and digital. So we, sitting at the centre of Cabinet Office, we've developed a very clear and simple government curriculum. And on that framework is detail around how to access training, what training and what level. So we're supporting all government departments. So this is kind of a huge workforce of around 500,000. The functions and the professions within government as well, with a suite of training products that we deliver in collaboration with Thomas and the team, but also through innovative and reputable learning providers. So we've got good frameworks in place to enable innovative training, learning and development. And what we found it really important to do, actually, I say about some of those universal skills, but we've done a lot of work over the last 2 years to define and specify the levels of proficiency. So what we know that we need each of our members of workforce to do at each level. And so we've been specific about the minimum knowledge and skill requirements, and we've built up kind of a layering approach. So we've got an offer for awareness, working, practitioner and expert levels. And we really want to help people to understand what is required, what they need to know to do their role well, and what benefits that will have. And one example that's very close to my heart is what we're doing with the graduate entry route. And this is a great example of how we're kind of raising the bar. So for our civil service fast stream programme, in collaboration again with Thomas and the team, we delivered a data and digital skills pilot as a kind of test. And what we found is that raised both capability and confidence levels in terms of data and digital. And we can now scale up that kind of program so that we can upskill all of the workforce.
And it sounds like you said about giving confidence. Is this, you know, I mean, it sounds obvious, but a lot of people still are not necessarily as confident as they should be in terms of what's required. Have you found that something that is easy to instill into people? Because confidence, you know, is a very personal thing.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we know that, you know, building knowledge, skills and capability will help in turn build confidence and to help people feel equipped and credible and ready to kind of execute the skills and the knowledge on the job. So it's a work in progress, I would say. I think having the specification and being clear around the different levels and what is required in each role. So, you know, we don't mean that everybody working in non-specialist roles needs to be an deep expert, but it's about what you need to know, who you need to go to if you need to ask for some deep specialist advice, and also making our training offer accessible for all. I think that helps. So helping to navigate the training, but also delivering that in bite-sized pieces where then we can put into practice the 70-20-10 model of learning, where, you know, there's a bit of learning acquisition through training, and then that's discussed on the job. And it's all about, well, what does that mean? What does it mean in the day-to-day job to bring that to life?
And Thomas, you know, you said you've got these 2,000 new hires. How are you going to attract the expertise you need? Are you going to target graduates, as Sonia was saying?
Oh, it's a mix. So if we project forward, we've identified we need something in the region of about 12,000 new hires into government to allow us to close the vacancy gap that we've currently got, to address anticipated attrition over the next 2 to 3 years, and also, I suppose, substitute some of our contingent labour where we feel that's appropriate. That requires us to look at a whole suite of different approaches to attract people in. So in some cases, we genuinely need, now with immediate effect, we need those people with the very developed expert skills that can help us fix some of those most difficult sort of scale transformational problems. So some examples of that might be thinking about single log-on for government, thinking about how we start to share data across government departments in a consistent way, how we might really capitalize on generative AI. So that requires us to be able to compete in the market, which means we need a solid employee value proposition. A little later in the year, it is likely that we will be presenting our brand in a slightly different way for digital and data in government. And in parallel, of course, critical part of an employer value proposition is pay. Pay reform in the civil service is a hard thing to bring about, but there's a lot of activity that's taking place across all government departments to harmonise, to uplift, to ensure that we can be competitive with the pay that we have for both new incoming civil servants and also for our existing civil servants. So part of it is making sure that we're able to attract in and bring in and compete for experienced hires. What we're also doing, though, in parallel is a couple of things. Firstly, Sonia gave a really good account of how we're capitalising on graduates through the Fast Student programme. In addition to that, though, we genuinely recognise the need to build from within. It is no longer feasible for us to go to the market for everything and expect to be able to buy in off the shelf almost like these fully fledged skills. We as an organisation need to take responsibility for our own problem, attract in people at the very outset of their career who show the potential, the aptitude, the excitement, the enthusiasm to work in digital data, and give them, from whatever background they're from, the opportunity to be upskilled and developed. And that means taking advantage of things like the apprenticeship levy and apprentices. It means making sure that we have genuinely open, diverse intakes of internships so that people can get experience and signpost them to careers in the civil service. So it's going to be a mix of different approaches that we would take.
And Sonia, you sort of touched on some of those with training internally. Is that, I mean, you know, that I was quite struck by that difference between 2,000 hires, but you still need 12,000. That's a big specialist skills gap. is it just a question of training internally, Sonia, or is there more that you can do to close that gap?
Yeah, I think as Thomas has alluded to, there's a whole blend of in terms of our strategy. So it's bringing in, it's training, it's retraining, it's upskilling, all of those together. I wanted to just build on the point that Thomas made about the entry and progression routes, because this is going to be key in terms of how we close the gap. And Thomas mentioned apprenticeships. Currently, actually, we've got around 700 learners in progress on their digital or data apprenticeships. So these range from level 3 software development or technicians right up to the level 7, where we have the digital and technology solution standard. So I think in total in the data and digital space, we've got 12 standards and a number of pathways for degree apprenticeships. So we're kind of trying to offer a range of entry and progression routes, also make it really accessible for our existing workforce who have an aptitude or an interest or a passion to be able to step on to a training route that's right for them, and how we support them. So we're continually doing that. And I think this is really important, actually, as we look at the wider market. Where are our data and digital specialists now in the country? How can we shift that dial for the future? So through our apprenticeship routes, actually, we are supporting the levelling up agenda. And actually, for those 700 learners, 80% of those apprentices are currently based outside of London, which is helpful, I think, in terms of how we think about our future strategy. And the other exciting thing that we have, don't know if listeners are familiar with the T-level qualification, but we are hosting a number of 16 to 18-year-olds at the moment on their T-level qualifications in work placements and digital and data work placements across the civil service, tying those up with a buddying approach with current civil servants, some of whom are fast streamers. And that's really kind of to instill this curiosity around building a long-term career within the public sector.
And Sonia, by the way, you've got some feedback from Jeanette Phillips, who's listening, who has said they're happy to help us as volunteers, particularly in the care and well-being sector, and she's included her email, so you already have a good offer there. And yes, there's quite a few details. They've said they've submitted a report about the future of work, a work in process, and they've written a report for the Leaders' Council of Great Britain about hybrid hubs and hublets. Thomas, are there areas within government that you want to prioritise when it comes to improving digital capabilities?
Blimey, yes. So our approach has been very specifically to take some of the guidance and some of the steer that you heard Jonathan speak to a bit earlier on in the NAO report. And I don't want to steal my colleague's thunder, because I don't think we've given a formal response yet on the NAO report. And I would encourage people to drop into the pack, which is on Monday. But it's very much to focus on our leaders first. So starting right at the top of the organisation, making sure at ministerial level, at PermSec level, at our DGs, that we are genuinely leaning in and helping them to feel confident, to feel skilled, to feel like they understand actually the opportunities that digital and data might present their organisation. So a couple of ways we're doing that is firstly thinking about how we genuinely equip them with those skills. So last year, as part of the strategy, we also published a standard that we describe as digital and data essentials for senior civil servants. So if you're interested, you can find it on gov.uk. And it describes, I suppose, what we expect of all senior civil servants in whatever role they're going to be in with respect to digital and data. So it explains that we want people to be able to use data intelligently, be able to visualize it, test it for its integrity. We want senior civil servants to be able to start with a user-first mindset, to really understand, I suppose, what the needs of their users, their citizens, so that they themselves can tap into things like seldom heard voices and make sure that when they are the custodians of services for citizens. They're genuinely able to meet citizen need. And it has a number of other things in those standards. And against those standards, we've then created a digital excellence program, which Sonia referred to a minute ago, which is the suite of products that is going to help those senior civil servants develop the skills that they need. So equipping them with those skills is one thing, but then also making sure that at a very senior level, we've got the right people in the right positions, and structurally, we recognise the importance of digital data. So that means making sure that we have non-exec directors on our boards that have a level of digital and data expertise and can support the most senior teams in departments with the decisions they're making and understand what the impact of digital could be. Similarly, making sure that we recognise the status of our CDIOs and our CDOs and recognise them on ExCos in the same way that traditionally we might have recognised HRDs, COOs, FDs, and so on. So I think we've been quite specific when we go beyond that segment that I described as digital makers. Our starting point is to think about the most senior leaders in government, be they in policy, commercial, HR, and making sure that they feel like they are equipped and positioned to be successful.
And is the shortage of digital skills that we've got at the moment, is that affecting, this question for both of you really, is this affecting any particular part of government more than department, more than most?
Let me have a go at answering that. No, I think it's balanced across many of the different teams, but it's different. There are different opportunities associated with different teams. So if we take policy departments, so policy departments that are primarily built around sort of new policies and have less of a sort of an operational focus will have one set of challenges and a need for certain sort of skills. Whereas if you're a very large department like HMRC or DWP, you're likely to sort of have a different perspective on digital data because you have much bigger workforces, and you'll be thinking very carefully about how do I maximize the value I get from that existing workforce. So whatever sort of type of organization you are, I think all of our permsec's and all of our CDIOs are expressing, I suppose, some of the same concern that they may be not equipped with the skills that they need, both in their digital teams, but also beyond their digital teams. I suspect you could go to parts of government and they would still see digital as the equivalent of the IT crowd in the corner. As someone who's going to come and give them a new sort of desktop at some stage, rather than maybe sort of the vehicle that allows them to be genuinely transformative and rethink what is our proposition for citizens.
It's funny you should mention the IT crowd. Just before we came live, I did have to actually switch my site off and on again. Yes, in order to get it to work. Sonia, perhaps a little bit more detail on how the government campus is going to support the civil service building these digital skills at scale, because you mentioned how many people in the workforce. That's an enormous amount of people.
Yeah, I think I needed that help before when I was logging on this morning as well. But I just was going to build on what Thomas has said. We have made huge progress. So yes, there is a skills gap. But I was just thinking about my time as a civil servant and the great strides and progress we've made. We know that our citizens, users of our services, whether that be getting a passport, whether that be doing a tax return, they want quick responses here now. And I think just in terms of the digital advancements that we've made over the last few years are huge, and hopefully people all across the UK are benefiting from that. But we know we need to do more. So to your question around, well, what is it that we're doing to help close the skills gap, build digital and data skills at scale? Thomas mentioned and touched upon some of the programs. So we do have, right from the top, right down, interactive offers. But I think starting at the top with the digital excellence program that Thomas mentioned, this is really around equipping our leaders with this digital transformation mindset. And I think that's what's really important, as Thomas alluded to, because we need all our middle and senior and executive managers in the civil service who are not the deep experts, like I said before, to be able to really think about digital enablement and transformation as we, in the provision of public services. So the Digital Excellence Programme is a great starter to really provide all our leaders and managers with the knowledge and the skills that they need to be able to deliver excellence through digital tools. We've had great success with that pilot, so I think we're at the scaling up stage now, and an expansion stage. And I think just it's helpful to we're very impact focused. So on the training that we deliver from within the Government Skills and Curriculum Unit, we want to be able to say, okay, does it work? Is this really making a difference day to day? Are our leaders becoming more digital savvy and helping their teams accelerate some of their learning and thinking? So what we know from the Digital Excellence Programme pilots is that 70% of the learners reported that they had very quickly, immediately started to apply the learning from the programme. They also like that they're able to learn at their own pace. We know that this is important in kind of the way that we work today, in a hybrid way of working. And what we know is that we want to use all of our digital and data training as a springboard to kind of spark curiosity, but to move towards further learning. So that's where we're working with Thomas and team to link to the DDAC skills and capability framework. We've got another couple of exciting things on the plan. So later this year, and our Cabinet Secretary announced a couple of months ago, but we're working on a kind of moment across the whole workforce where we'll bring everyone together to focus on data skills, and this will be a springboard into the wider kind of data and digital learning framework. But we're going to ask all our civil servants to engage in at least 90 minutes of formal training and a day's learning and development focused specifically on data. We've got lots of products. I won't go into too much detail, but we've kind of developed with Thomas and team and with our colleagues in ONS a data masterclass for senior leaders, and then that goes down at all of the different proficiency levels that I talked about earlier. So really exciting things, but not forgetting that everybody's on a different journey. So we then have the basics innovation masterclass, which we know is helpful for and research shows us has a kind of correlation with being able to use data and digital applications. And then at the lower levels, we've got the basic foundations around, how can you just get the basics right, Excel navigation and so on.
So final thoughts then from the two of you as we come to the end of this panel session. It does sound heartening. Thomas?
It sounds what, sorry?
Heartening. Encouraging, yeah.
Yes. Yes. As I said, I mean, the very opening, I think I am an optimist, but I think we genuinely have reasons to be optimistic. We shouldn't underestimate I suppose the size of the and the scale of the task that this relates to. This is genuinely a long-term program in which we need to deliver some quite immediate sort of short-term changes. Over the long term, one of the commitments actually that our Digital and Data Board have signed up to, which is an extension of those that they already committed to in the strategy Jonathan spoke to earlier on, is that the workforce will change over time. So right now, our digital and data makers in government represent about just over 4% of our overall workforce. Our permanent secretaries have agreed that needs to be 6% of the overall workforce by the end of 2025. In reality, I think we know that if we're to follow the same trends that we see across other organisations and across other governments, we need to get quite quickly to something like 10, 12% of the organisation. That represents a material change for the civil service, but a change that's critical if we're going to actually be able to deliver the kind of services that our citizens expect of us in the future. So yeah, small steps. I think a year into our strategy, we're making good progress, but there is definitely more to do.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much, Thomas and Sonia, for kicking off the day with a really interesting conversation. And we'll take a short break now, time to digest what's been covered so far. And if you have the chance, do engage with the speed networking opportunity. You never know, perhaps you can use what you've learned as an icebreaker. And I'll see you back here at 10:40 for our panel on data.